Hey, so we're back again with part 2 in my nice little studio space here. And I did leave the last video about sound design where we really just focused on taking a sound and then being able to process it through the Polyend Tracker workflow. Now in this video, what I thought is we'll go through a few ways we can actually capture audio, whether that be a mobile phone or a little microphone that you got access to, and then being able to pull it onto the Polyend Tracker and do some really cool things with the sample editor. As well as we'll look at ways we can create some sort of synthesizer types as well, so we can actually really get in depth with the granularity of the Polyend Tracker. So let's get straight into it. Now, we're at a really interesting point because we've taken some samples and we elevated it through the sound engine on the Polyend Tracker, and we've added some different effects and we've come out with something that's really nice. But what happens when you want to actually make samples? And I will say, like, if you haven't already, my sample pack is down below, so definitely grab it. But if we wanted to actually start making samples for this, and you will see a lot of people, they'll run around with some big fancy hardware. Like, I'm not going to lie, I do have some nice fancy hardware to record these tutorials. But I will say you don't really need that. Like, if you have access to a basic microphone, even your mobile phone, that has quite a capable microphone on it already. Like, it does a pretty good job. And if you're just running around collecting samples that way, you can put them onto your computer, you can take out the SD card, you can put those files onto your SD card, and you're on your way. There's a little bit of editing that you would want to do with your sampling suite. There is a couple bits of software. Audacity would probably be the easiest one to get your hands on. I'll leave that in the comments below. But you can edit your samples, you can put a bit of a normalize function on it, and you can get them in here and start working. Now on the Polyend Tracker, we do have ways to record into the device. So we have a line input and a mic input. It might be a bit blurry on the camera. But in essence, what it means, a line in is a lot hotter or a lot more voltage than a mic input. So this will have a preamp. This doesn't need a preamp. So if we were to actually plug it in a microphone into the Polyend Tracker, depending on what you want to get, you could get like a dynamic microphone and plug it into the mic input, or you could have a synthesizer and plug it into the line input. And the way we can use the Polyend Tracker to record these samples is through the sample recorder. So corresponding to the line input and the other input, so line in, if we have a synthesizer, we can plug it straight into there. We also have access to the different microphones. So we have a low gain, so it means there's not much power that needs to be sent to the microphone, so it can be considered to have a lot less hiss in it. You can use that one. Or if you were to use a high gain microphone, it adds a little bit more power. And then we can control a few of the elements here. So we can add some extra gain to the signal. We can monitor the sound. So when we're in here, we're actually listening to the Polyend Tracker making the sounds. And really, also with line in, if you've got like an old vinyl player or a tape deck, you can use those as audio inputs. And if your phone has an auxiliary cable out, a lot of the modern phones don't, but you can actually have music playing, or you can play your samples on your phone and then route them straight into here. And all you have to do is hit the record. If there was something happening here, we would be getting that signal. So the last thing on here is it has a radio, which is a really cool way of, if you're just in a rut or you don't know what sample you want to go, it's just sampling the radio. And if we play it, I won't play it too much because copyright. But we can use the radio as a way to get out of those creative lulls, like, oh, I just can't find a sample. We can actually sample something from the radio and start really meddling it in that sample engine that we've got. So let's say we've recorded something off the radio. I've got that loaded into my sample loader, and it will come in a bit raw, like the start point isn't really crisp or anything like that. We can jump into the sample editor on the Polyend Tracker to really start fine tuning. Now let's play this sample.
Yeah, thanks Bob.
Say I just want to get that thanks Bob right there. I'm just going to go to the start And we're going to get that right.
Thanks, Bob.
Right.
Thanks, Bob.
Right on that point. And we can get a bit granular, and we can make sure it's starting.
Thanks, Bob.
Starting on the 0. And the first effect I usually like to set up is a crop. So I'm just going to apply that crop.
Thanks, Bob.
And we've shrunk down that sound, so that's taken a lot of the data out of memory. Another thing we can do is normalize. So what this will do is it'll pick the highest frequency along here and then stretch the whole sample, or makes the volume the max it can go from that top of that sample. So if we select that effect as well, we can preview it before we apply it. We can apply it. And as I was saying before, these are all destructive effects. So you don't want to go too crazy and start meddling with the sound and then you can't go back. So some of these I would like to preview. So if I play this again.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Bob.
What happens if we reverse it? It's quite interesting. So we can create some reverse snare sounds. So we can just bring like a cymbal in, or say we bring 2 cymbals in and one of them we just throw this reverse sound on. We can amplify the signal, but because we normalized it, amplification just means that we keep increasing the volume. Overdrive, similar to how we had the non-destructive overdrive in the effects here, that is a destructive overdrive to the actual sample as well. We can create our own delay, so we're sending it to the delay and then we're getting the sample back. We've got a bit crusher, which is similar to how we're changing the bit depth. So with the bit crusher, we have the bit, which is the bit depth, which is how much information can be stored between 0 and 100%. So if we've got it set to 8 bits, I think that's 128. And then if we say 4-bit, that's only 16 bits of information that we can fit in that segment. So it's going to be very crushed. So we'll set that 441.
Thanks, Bob.
Compared to 8-bit.
Thanks, Bob.
This little bit sample, 1-bit.
Thanks, Bob.
Old PCM noise, we don't want that. And then we have the rate. So if we look at a sample, 1 second sample of audio, we have 441. So it's 44,100 units that we can space in that 1 second sample. So if we keep the bit rate up, so we've got a really nice clean signal, but we change this rate, this actually creates a really nice warm sound. So I'm going to make that 1028. We'll preview that.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Bob.
Sounds like an old game there.
Thanks, Bob.
And really, I like just to sit here on the Polyend Tracker and just like really mess with the sample to see how it turns out. We've got a chorus effect, so not like we're sending a chorus sound to the set. Well, we don't have a chorus effect on the Polyend Tracker, but we can actually add a chorus effect.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Bob.
It's probably a bit much.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Bob.
Sounds more like a flanger there. And as we said, we do have a flanger. So another effect, we have an equalizer, so we can actually sort of sculpt the sound, so we can take out some of the low end, or we can boost the mids, or we can reduce the highs. This is a destructive effect as well, so don't go crazy in here testing out the mixing or sampling and thinking that you can come back into here. This is really a last effect I touch when I'm doing my mixes, and I'll talk about that in a later video. I'm just going to go back. We have a limiter, so say we made our sample a bit too harsh, we can use this to bring the sound back. We have a compressor. We have a wavetable smoother. Now this is an interesting effect, creating some blends. These ones are a little bit more specialized, but I want to talk about the last two because this is a really nice way to clean up a sample. If I bring the end super tiny, like really, they're almost touching, I'm just going to use the fade in. So what they'll do is it'll go from 0 to 100. And if I zoom in again, we'll see it's pulled that down to 0. So that means there'll be no clicks in this sample. So if we play that.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Bob.
And then we can check the end to make sure there'll be no clicks as well. So we can move the start right down to the end. Actually won't need to be that granular. We just got that. and I'm going to use the fade out. And then if we zoom in onto the out, it's nice and faded out. Cool, so we've gone through, we've cropped the sound, we've normalized it, we've applied a little bit of effect, we've cleaned up the start and end point so we have no clipping.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Bob. And really, this is ready to go. And there are a couple more effects in the Polyend Tracker. So we have a wavetable smoother, which is a really cool way of, like, if we have a sample that's not really playing nice.
Thanks, Bob.
Well, I'm going to start destroying the sound now. I'm going to select the effect. And if you know how the wavetable synthesizer works, it creates windows that it will scroll between. So we have a 2048 window, and then we have windows that go in between. So what happens is it takes a sample from here and then blends it with a sample 256 samples down. So it creates this nice transition. So if we preview this, this is going to sound god awful. Something interesting, but if we apply that, now this is going to be a destructive effect, I can't come back from this, and we go into that wavetable synthesizer. So we're just going to activate this one, and we're going to do it on the envelope, and we set that to the wavetable synth. What happens if we play it live? And we've just created a really interesting sound that we can start exploring with this sound engine. And yeah, that's something I really enjoy doing, especially with like really weird sounds as well. Like we can blend some really cool samples together and create something completely new. Now, if we jump back into the sample editor, just for the last part, we have time stretch beat and time stretch note. So in time stretch beat, we sort of talked about this when we were creating our aim and break in the video above with drums and groove. And really this lets us take so we say we know a specific 4 on the floor beat. So if I go into the breaks on my tracker tip, I've labeled each one of these with 136, so that's the BPM of the sample. So if we preview that, if we bring that in and we use time stretch beat, we can actually stretch that sample however we want. So we can go in here, I could bump it up to 150 beats per minute. We just need to know how many steps the sample has. And I'm just going to go back, because the next one is we can time stretch the notes. To how we use the granular synth, we can actually use the time stretch note to do the same thing. So really, it's your flavor, it's how you want to do it. But that is pretty much all the effects that we have disposed for sample editing, and that is quite powerful. Alright, so in the video we've gone through how to take our samples to the next level, how we can make our own samples, but we also got access to making some synthesizers on here, which is interesting for a tracker. Like you do have trackers like LSDJ and their mate and Delphi Mask, which have inbuilt sound generators in them, but we can sort of treat the Polyend Tracker as a way of generating sound by creating some single cycle waveforms. Now, the wavetable synthesis sort of touches on this with how it handles the sound, but we can sort of create our own single cycle sound. Now, I'm going to pick from the oscillator group here, because what I've done is I've just gone the Moog grandmother and just recorded a whole bunch of different cycles. I might we'll grab the low one there, so we've got more room to actually get that single cycle, and I'm just going to load that in here. So preview that, and we are going to go up to crop, because I'm just going to pick a point to create a cycle, and we need to actually draw it in. There it is, and we'll go here, and we are just going to zoom to really try and get this single cycle. Now, because of how it's playing, I'm just going to create a forward loop. So we've got that single cycle. Now, it can be a bit annoying to jump between, so it's a bit easier to do a rough crop, and then we only got like a little bit to work with, so I can really dial in the sound. So if I do something like this, cool. And because I picked a low C, I'm going to go and probably raise it up 12. But if we play a chord, we've got that single cycle wave gone, and that's just one part. We've just created the oscillator. Now we're going to talk a bit about synthesis that we can do. We can create a subtractive synth. So as the Moog grandmother, that's a subtractive synth. We have our oscillator sound, and I record that with no filters or anything. So it's just a clean oscillator sound. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to add a low pass filter on top of it. So low pass, as we were talking about before, it controls that sound. I'm going to add a low pass filter on top, and I want to animate that with the envelope. So we're going to go to the cutoff and we're going to give it envelope. Now it's probably better if we make this 50% so we can sort of hear what's going on. So it's like a slow ramp up. Let's say I want it to like jump up and then come down really quick. We'll bring the sustain down. And we can work with the VCA. So on a subtractive synth, we have the oscillator, we have a VC voltage controlled filter. So the next part on our synthesizer that we're building, we have the amplitude, so the actual volume, which we can jump straight into the volume command. So let's say we add a bit of attack. We can add a bit of delay. We'll bring and I'm probably just going to jump back to the cutoff. So I really enjoy that sound. And we'll throw, we'll add a reverb because on the Moog grandmother we have a nice spring reverb. Could add some delay. And we could start messing with the waveform, making it sound a little bit more retro. Actually sounds like a Commodore. And we will lower the volume because we don't want to blow my speakers. Actually, one thing I didn't do in the sample editor, which I should have, is we'll just normalize the sound. So it just gives it a much broader range. So I just quickly plotted something into one of my test tracks, and like a analog synth, sometimes they come with sequencers. So we've got And that is a little way to create a analog synth on the Polyend Tracker. And really I do have a bunch of different waveforms there. And when you think about what I did, I just created a single cycle. So you could take a sample of whatever you want and make a single cycle of that waveform. And that could be your entire sound. So you can create some really cool sounding synths with this. We're dealing with trackers and we're getting pretty interesting territory, and I really wanted to bring up a game. If you ever played Donkey Kong Country, you know where I'm going with this, but there was a song for aquatic ambience, which was one of the levels, or water level, lots of fun there, by David Wise, and he was inspired by wave sequencing synthesizers, and he was able to do this really cool sounding effect with these moving pads and chords on a tracker. So I thought, let's have a look at some of the techniques he did, or how we can set up wave sequencing on the Polyend Tracker. Now, wave sequencing itself is quite an interesting sound design element, because what we're doing is we're taking samples and we've got all these little lots of ADSR envelopes to actually sequence the individual samples. And if we were to bring this into a tracker sense, we're actually sequencing waveforms in a way like how we set up that Hocketing channel on the melody line. And if we're thinking of it like that, we can actually create our own samples by layering a whole bunch of different samples together, creating these really long pad sounds, and then being able to render them out and export them. So I thought, let's actually make something here. So I sort of want a bit of a transient hit. So what I might do is I'll just get a kick drum or snare. That would be a good one. And I'm going to add that micro. Now I'm going to adjust the gate length so it's quite short. So we've got a little waveform. Alongside that waveform, I might pick something from the lead. So if I So we're adding a bit of transient on there, but what I might do is, say for 2 bars, we will fade that out. So we'll go each, oh look, it's already set up. So we'll go from 2 and we'll go from 30, whoops, to 0. If we fill that, we'll fade out. And then, so I did this a bit weird. What I'll do is I'll just copy. We'll try and keep it on one screen so we're not going a bit out of control, but do remember that we do have access to 8 channels doing this. Now I'm going to bring in a different sample to go along that sound. So similar to how we were playing around with the pad sounds in the previous video. So I'm just going to pick something else. Might make that lower. And then we'll make that fade in. So again, we'll set that to 30. Should have selected the area I wanted to adjust. And same with this one, I'm going to fade that out. And then we'll create a fade out here as well. We could try and add some other sound in here. Now I'm trying to keep within one note. Cool, so I just plotted something in. So we've got different elements fading in and out. Now I'm using the volume command to create those fades in and out. But if we select all of this, and I'm just going to go more, and we're going to render selection, just going to quickly auto name it because this is something I'm probably going to burn. Render and load. We've got it set up there. And then if we go to sample playback, so we've got all those elements playing at once, and what I'm going to do is that bit of a trick with the granular, and I'm going to set the position somewhere in the center, increase the length quite a lot, And then I'm going to use the granular position as a LFO, and we're going to set that to a saw, and we're going to make that quite long. Sort of has this weird horror sound, but that is just really a glimpse of what we can do with the tracker just for sound design. Like, we have access to all the effects, we can edit that sample, we could create some different blendings between, say, I did a blend between that single oscillator analog synth and a square wave synth, and then I create a blend, and then I could take that blend into the wavetable smoothing algorithm, and I could create a completely different sound from there. It's really just, we could take something that's quite simple, and then because of the way trackers are, we can get extremely granular and create some really new sounds from it. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. So I hope you definitely experiment in this area. And before anything, I'm going to go to my file and I'm going to save everything I've done. Alright, so we're in a really cool position right now because it was a bit of a brain dump, I will say that. But all these techniques that I've shown over the last couple of videos, they're not just static that you have to follow through in a linear sequence. You can chop and change them however you want. Like, you could start with creating that wave sequence and then rendering it out, then putting it through a slice command and then having those slices play through your beat. Like, this is why I really enjoy trackers, because of how granular you can get with a sample and get down to like the single cycle level and create these new interesting sounds that would just never exist before. And on that, we are in a really nice spot too, because now we have a really nice short little 2-bar loop that's a little bit crisp, a little bit polished. We've got some sound design elements in there, and we're at a point where I feel we can start extending this out. So 2 bars, if we kept playing that forever, it'll definitely get repetitive. But we're going to talk about how to add beginnings and ends to a much larger loop. So we'll extend it from 2 bars to 8 bars. So we have something that we can work with in an arrangement. So if you found this video useful, definitely give it a thumbs up, because it tells the algorithm to point it to other Polyend Tracker users. As well, if you want to help out what I'm doing here, I do have this lovely shirt design that you can pick up, and I'll leave a link below. But all in all, I hope you stick around for the next video, and I look forward to seeing you next time.